But to
a
bless
cada
each person?
persona. ¿Por qué no?
Why not?
La bendición es para
The blessing
todos.
is for all.
In an unprecedented move, Pope Francis made a bold decision that has sent ripples through the Catholic Church and the world. Known for his humility and willingness to challenge tradition, the Pope opened the Second Jubilee Holy Door at the Trovivia prison, marking his third visit to a correctional facility during his pontificate. This act is more than just a symbolic gesture. It's a statement about his vision for a church that is compassionate, inclusive, and willing to confront the realities of society. In this video, we explore how this decision could reshape the future of faith and the Catholic Church. Pope Francis's vision for the future of the Catholic Church. A new era of faith. Pope Francis, who became the 266th Pope of the Roman Catholic Church in 2013, has proven to be one of the most transformative and influential religious leaders of the 21st century. As he approaches the 11th year of his papacy, it's clear that his leadership is not just about maintaining the status quo, but reshaping the very fabric of the Church to address the pressing issues of our time. His papacy has been marked by a profound reorientation of the Church's focus toward humility, compassion, inclusivity, and service to the marginalized. But what lies ahead for the Church under Pope Francis's guidance, and how does he envision its future? A humble beginning. Pope Francis' first steps in leadership. When Pope Francis first appeared on the balcony of St. Peter's Square, Peter's Basilica in March 2013, he made an immediate and lasting impression. With the world watching, he greeted the faithful with a simple request: "Pray for me." That request for prayer, coupled with his humble demeanor, set the tone for a papacy that would not be defined by lavish ceremonies and displays of power, but by an embrace of simplicity and service. His decision to live in the modest Vatican guest house, rather than the luxurious apostolic palace, was symbolic of his commitment to reject the traditional trappings of papal authority in favor of a more grounded and humble leadership. He made it clear that his papacy would be centered on the needs of the people, not on the grandeur of the office. This shift in priorities was also evident in his decision to emphasize the pastoral nature of the Church. Pope Francis's papacy has sought to challenge the hierarchy of the Church to move away from elitism and insularity. His leadership has been firmly grounded in the belief that the Church's role is to reach out to those who are most in need, whether they are the poor, the sick, the marginalized, or the oppressed. The message was clear. The Church should not be a place of judgment or exclusion, but a home for all, especially those who feel abandoned or forgotten by society. Central themes: inclusivity, humility, and outreach to the marginalized Pope. Francis's leadership has been characterized by three central themes: inclusivity, humility, and outreach to the marginalized. His papacy has sought to break down the walls that have often divided the Church from the world and from those in need. His words and actions have consistently challenged the Church to be more open, more compassionate, and more attuned to the struggles of everyday people. One of the most striking examples of Pope Francis's inclusivity has been his approach to the LGBTQ+ community. While the Church's doctrinal stance on homosexuality has not changed, Pope Francis's famous remark, "Who am I to judge?" offered a sense of openness and acceptance that had been largely absent from previous papacies. His words signaled a shift in tone, one that encouraged the Church to be more welcoming and less condemning. For many LGBTQ+ individuals, these words represented a break from the exclusionary attitudes of the past and a glimmer of hope for greater inclusion within the Church. Pope Francis has also shown a deep commitment to immigrant rights. He has visited refugee camps around the world, spoken out against the rise of anti-immigrant rhetoric, and called on governments to open their doors to those fleeing war, poverty, and persecution. His emphasis on the dignity of the human person, regardless of nationality, race, or religion, has been a hallmark of his papacy. In his encyclical Laudato Si', he framed environmental issues not just as political or scientific concerns, but as moral imperatives, underscoring the Church's role in advocating for the planet and its most vulnerable inhabitants. Perhaps one of Pope Francis' most significant contributions to the Church's global mission has been his emphasis on interfaith dialogue. He has repeatedly called for greater understanding and cooperation between different religious traditions, especially between Christians, Muslims, and Jews. His 2019 visit to the United Arab Emirates and his historic meeting with Sheikh Ahmed Al-Tayeb, the Grand Imam of Al-Azhar, marked a watershed moment in Catholic-Muslim relations. Pope Francis's openness to other faiths and his willingness to engage in dialogue with those who differ from him have set a powerful example for religious leaders worldwide. A radical call for environmental stewardship. In addition to his focus on inclusivity, Pope Francis has been an outspoken advocate for environmental justice. His encyclical Laudato Si', released in 2015, called for urgent action to address climate change, framing the environmental crisis as not just a scientific issue, but a moral one. The document urged Catholics and people of goodwill to recognize their responsibility to care for the earth as a sacred trust. Pope Francis argued that the ecological crisis disproportionately affects the poor and vulnerable, who are least equipped to cope with the effects of environmental degradation. In this encyclical, Pope Francis positioned the Catholic Church as a moral leader in the fight against climate change. His message resonated not just within religious communities, but also with environmental activists, policymakers, and global leaders. By connecting environmentalism with the Church's core teachings on justice, compassion, and solidarity, Pope Francis redefined the role of faith communities in addressing global crises. His call to care for our common home has inspired movements for climate action around the world, underscoring the need for both personal and collective responsibility in safeguarding the planet. Addressing economic inequality, a critique of unfettered capitalism. Pope Francis has also made a strong stand against economic systems that prioritize profit over people. His criticism of capitalism, particularly in its most exploitative forms, has been a central theme of his papacy. In Evangelii Gaudium, released in 2013, Pope Francis famously denounced the idolatry of money and called for a new economic model that emphasizes human dignity and social justice. His critique of global capitalism, with its emphasis on wealth accumulation at the expense of the poor, has resonated deeply with those who see economic inequality as one of the greatest challenges facing the world today. Pope Francis's condemnation of the throwaway culture, a term he uses to describe the ways in which society discards people, particularly the poor and the marginalized, has brought attention to the deepening divisions between the rich and the poor. He has consistently called for economic systems that prioritize the well-being of people over profit, and his advocacy for a fairer distribution of wealth has positioned the Catholic Church as a strong voice in the global conversation on economic justice. The tension between tradition and reform. While Pope Francis has been praised for his progressive stances on social issues, his papacy has not been without controversy. Critics, particularly among conservative factions of the Church, have expressed concern that his reforms may undermine the Church's traditional teachings and practices. This tension between tradition and reform is perhaps one of the defining features of Pope Francis's papacy. His efforts to bring about change within the Church, particularly in areas such as the role of women, the treatment of divorced and remarried Catholics, and the approach to LGBTQ+ issues, have sparked intense debate. However, Pope Francis has consistently maintained that his reforms are not about dismantling tradition, but about making it relevant in a rapidly changing world. He has emphasized that the Church must adapt to the needs of contemporary society while remaining true to its core mission. This balance between continuity and innovation has been a delicate tightrope for Pope Francis to walk, and it is one that will likely define his legacy as the Church's leader. A new era of leadership, the qualities of the next Pope. As Pope Francis enters the later stages of his papacy, speculation is already growing about who will succeed him and what qualities the next Pope will need to possess. The future leader of the Catholic Church will face a world that is more interconnected than ever before, yet deeply divided. The next pope must be someone who can unite the global church while also serving as a bridge builder between different faiths, nations, and cultures. He will need to continue Pope Francis's work of fostering dialogue, advocating for social justice, and confronting the pressing issues of our time. The next pope will also need to embody the qualities of humility and service that have defined Pope Francis' leadership. Whether through his efforts to address global inequality, his advocacy for the environment, or his outreach to the marginalized, Pope Francis has shown that true leadership is about service to others. The next pope must continue this spirit of selfless service, ensuring that the Church remains a beacon of hope and compassion in a world that desperately needs it. The essential role of pastoral care in the Catholic Church. The pastoral care element of the papacy is often overlooked, but is essential to the role of the Pope, the spiritual leader of over 1 billion Catholics worldwide. The Pope is not just a figurehead who guides the Church's doctrines and policies. He is also a shepherd to the global flock, a spiritual mentor, and a source of guidance for people navigating the trials and tribulations of everyday life. This responsibility requires a rare combination of empathy, wisdom, humility, and the ability to connect with people at all levels. The next pope, whoever they may be, must be someone who embodies these qualities, serving as a bridge between the ancient traditions of the Church and the challenges faced by the modern faithful. The next pope will need to provide spiritual comfort and offer practical guidance to those struggling with personal, social, and ethical dilemmas. A true leader in the Church must understand that spirituality is not an abstract concept, but something that deeply affects people's lives, whether they are struggling with family issues, unemployment, illness, or their place in the world. Catholics today face challenges that Pope Francis himself has already acknowledged. A world that is increasingly secular, deeply divided, and struggling with inequality and environmental crises. To meet these challenges, the next pope must adopt an approach that does not seek to rule from above, as has sometimes been the case in the Church's long history. Instead, they must walk alongside the faithful, serving as a companion who understands and shares in their joys and struggles. Pastoral care should not be an afterthought, but an integral part of the papacy, and this will require a leader who listens to and empathizes with people across different walks of life. The Catholic Church's future, a global shift toward the global South. While the Pope has traditionally been a figure rooted in Europe, a shift is underway in the global Catholic community. The future of the Church is increasingly tied to the global South, encompassing regions like Africa, Latin America, and parts of Asia. For decades, the epicenter of Catholicism has been Europe, but over the past century, the demographics of the faith have changed dramatically. Catholic populations in the global South have surged, particularly in countries like Brazil, Mexico, Nigeria, and the Philippines. These regions are now the heart of the Church, contributing to its growth and vitality. The next pope must be someone who understands and prioritizes this shift, recognizing that the Church's future lies in these regions where Catholicism is flourishing and offering hope to the impoverished, the marginalized, and the disenfranchised. While regions in Europe and North America are seeing a decline in church attendance, especially among younger generations, the Church in Africa and Latin America continues to grow. In these regions, vibrant communities of faith are emerging, along with a new generation of clergy eager to spread the gospel and serve their communities. In Africa, for example, the Catholic population has exploded in recent decades, and young people are deeply involved in religious life. Cardinal Peter Turkson of Ghana has become an influential voice within the Vatican, symbolizing the potential power and vitality of the African Church. His leadership is a direct reflection of the growth and prominence of the faith on the African continent. In Latin America, the Church continues to face challenges from secularism and competing religious movements, particularly evangelical Christianity, but it remains a powerful force in the region's social and cultural life. Asia also represents a significant area of growth for Catholicism, particularly in the Philippines, where Catholicism is the dominant religion. In India, the Church is thriving amidst a complex backdrop of religious pluralism, where Catholicism has managed to establish a place in a country with deep religious and cultural diversity. The next Pope must understand the challenges faced by Catholics in these regions and be ready to lift up their voices, ensuring that their concerns are reflected in the Church's global agenda. For too long, the concerns of the Global South have been marginalized within the Vatican, overshadowed by the priorities of the traditional centers of power in Europe. This needs to change, and the next Pope must actively work to bring the voices of these regions into the decision-making processes that shape the future of the Church. The symbolic power of a Pope from the Global South. The symbolic importance of electing a Pope from the Global South cannot be overstated. Such a decision would be an acknowledgement that the Catholic Church is no longer an institution predominantly rooted in European culture and traditions, but a global faith that spans continents, cultures, and languages. The Church has long struggled with accusations of Eurocentrism and a lack of understanding of the realities faced by Catholics in other parts of the world. By electing a Pope from the Global South, the Church would signal a profound shift in its identity and mission, recognizing that Catholicism is a worldwide faith that must engage with the challenges faced by people across the globe. Cardinal Luis Antonio Tagle from the Philippines and Cardinal Peter Turkson from Ghana are two leading figures who embody this vision. Both are strong contenders to succeed Pope Francis, each bringing their own unique perspectives and leadership styles to the table. A Pope from the Global South would be able to speak directly to the concerns of those living in poverty, those affected by climate change, and those struggling with the realities of migration and displacement. These are issues that disproportionately affect the Global South, and they are concerns that must be addressed with urgency and compassion. A focus on justice and equality, a voice for the marginalized. A Pope from the Global South would also be a powerful advocate for social justice, environmental justice, and the protection of human dignity. Cardinal Peter Turkson, for example, has been a vocal advocate for addressing the global climate crisis and its disproportionate impact on vulnerable communities. As a key figure in Pope Francis's environmental encyclical Laudato Si', Turkson has helped to elevate the Church's role in advocating for the protection of our planet, not just as a moral issue, but as an issue that directly affects the poor and marginalized. His leadership in this area underscores the need for the Church to remain a voice of moral clarity in the fight against injustice. The next Pope will need to be someone who can embody this same sense of moral clarity, standing up for the most vulnerable in society, whether they are facing the ravages of climate change, poverty, or political oppression. A Pope who comes from the Global South will have a unique understanding of these struggles, as many of the most pressing issues the world faces today are being experienced most acutely in the Global South. For Catholics living in these regions, the next Pope must be a leader who speaks to their reality and offers hope for a better future. The three leading candidates. A closer look. As speculation grows about who will succeed Pope Francis, three names consistently rise to the forefront of discussions: Cardinal Pietro Parolin, Cardinal Luis Antonio Tagle, and Cardinal Peter Turkson. Each of these candidates represents a different vision for the future of the Catholic Church, and each brings their own strengths and challenges to the table. Cardinal Pietro Parolin, the diplomat. Cardinal Pietro Parolin, often referred to as the Vatican's Prime Minister, has served as the Vatican's Secretary of State since 2013. A highly experienced diplomat, Parolin has worked behind the scenes on some of the Church's most significant international initiatives, including the Vatican's efforts to mediate peace in conflict zones and promote religious freedom around the world. His most notable achievement is the Vatican-China Agreement, a historic deal aimed at reconciling the Vatican with the Chinese government. While the agreement has been controversial, it underscores Parolin's commitment to diplomacy and his ability to navigate delicate geopolitical issues. However, Paroline's critics argue that his focus on diplomacy might overshadow the pastoral aspect of the papacy. While his diplomatic skills are undoubtedly valuable, the next pope must also be a figure who can connect with ordinary people and provide spiritual guidance in a world that is increasingly secular and divided. Paroline's supporters, however, argue that his experience and geopolitical acumen make him an ideal candidate to lead the Church in an era marked by global challenges. Cardinal Peter Turkson, the advocate for justice. Cardinal Peter Turkson, hailing from Ghana, is one of the most prominent African cardinals and a leading advocate for social and environmental justice. A key figure in the drafting of Laudato Si', Turkson has long been a champion for the protection of the environment and the promotion of social justice, particularly in the global South. His leadership is rooted in a deep commitment to addressing the needs of the poor and marginalized, and his advocacy for climate justice underscores his belief in the Church's role in promoting a more equitable and sustainable world. Turkson's candidacy is particularly compelling given the growing influence of the African Church, which is home to some of the most vibrant and dynamic Catholic communities in the world. While Turkson's style is more contemplative and reserved compared to some of the other candidates,